I believe strongly in the idea that we stagnate when we define ourselves according to what wrongs have been done to us rather than what progress we are making towards achieving a just world. I'm not in any way suggesting that we ignore the past and move forward as if it never happened. That would be a grave error because history helps us to contextualize why we are where we are and what we need to do to move forward. Secondly, we need to be au fait with history because, as they say, those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. You will therefore understand why I find it hurtful that there are some in our society who want to erase the history of our struggle for freedom and all its symbols. This brings me to today's episode, Afriforum and the rise of the ultra-right in South Africa and globally. This is in the context of the Constitutional Court's denial of their appeal against the Equality Court's ruling that the chanting of the Kill the Boer slogan does not amount to hate speech. Hello everyone, welcome back to Joe Talks Politics. I am your host Joseph Musia. Let's get right into it. Afriforum presents itself as a group focused on preserving cultural identity and human rights, but when we peel back the layers, its actions reveal a much more divisive agenda. While it frequently insists that it's only about preserving the rights of South Africa's white Afrikaner minority, its approach has often been racially exclusionary, seeking to reassert power and privilege for an ethnic group that historically benefited from apartheid. How does it do that? I'll give you two examples. The first is that it portrays South Africa as a country where savage natives are waiting at every corner to rob and maim the civilized whites. A place where blacks ran amok and where everything fell apart following the defeat of apartheid. I'm not here to defend the achievements of the ANC because a lot has gone wrong. But do you know who has borne the brunt of the incompetence and misrule? Black South Africans. Now let us come back to Kill the Boer. Afriforum insists that the chanting of this liberation struggle era slogan promotes hatred towards Afrikaners and that it has led to the killing of white farmers. There's ample evidence that the chant, although provocative to some, is not directly responsible for violence against white South Africans. The courts have clarified that the chant is symbolic of resistance to apartheid-era oppression rather than a call for racial violence. In fact, there's no substantive evidence linking it to the killing of white individuals in South Africa. Afriforum, however, continues to pursue this challenge in a manner that inflames racial tensions. The group presents itself as a defender of white South Africans, but in doing so, it amplifies racial divisions by framing this song as a direct threat. This kind of rhetoric, especially when unsubstantiated as it is, leads to a greater sense of fear and victimhood among white South Africans while also distracting from the real issues of inequality, poverty, and racial injustice that still persist in the country. By fighting for this cause, Afriforum is essentially weaponizing symbolic gestures to stoke fear and resentment. This creates a narrative of us versus them, reinforcing racial polarization rather than working towards reconciliation. Another significant aspect of Afriforum's strategy is its international campaigning. One of the most striking examples is its attempt to convince the global community, particularly in the United States, that Afrikaners are being persecuted in South Africa. The organization has run to international media outlets and even sought support from the US government, portraying Afrikaners as an endangered minority supposedly facing an existential threat from the post-apartheid government. Afriforum's claims of persecution are false. They are lies. In reality, The notion of a widespread campaign of violence against Afrikaners is part of a misinformation campaign. Yes, there are issues related to violent crime in South Africa, but the majority of these crimes are not racially motivated. In reality, the victims are overwhelmingly black and the perpetrators span all racial backgrounds. However, Afriforum's narrative paints a picture of whites as the sole targets, which is not only inaccurate but also dangerously misleading. Now consider this. Standing at the gates of our parliament, where the president and members of parliament enter our national legislature, stands a statue of Louis Botha. This is a Boer leader who played a key role in establishing the foundations of racial segregation and apartheid, which led to further marginalization of the black majority and the erosion of their political rights. In fact, these symbols of colonialism and white domination are found all around Parliament, Cape Town, and other centers around the country. We have seen how similar symbols were among the first to be toppled in other countries once those they represented were no longer in power. As a sign of a desire for true reconciliation and nation building, successive post-apartheid governments have resisted calls from some for these statues to be removed. If blacks or black governments were going after Afrikaners, why would they keep these symbols of oppression? Surely the rest of the world would understand if they were to be removed. The same way they understood when the statue of Saddam Hussein was so famously toppled by American troops in Iraq. So why does Afriforum push this narrative on the global stage? The answer lies in the organization's broader agenda. It seeks to isolate South Africa's political dynamics and portray the country as a place where white people are under siege. This rhetoric feeds into the wider narrative of white victimhood, which has been co-opted by far-right groups around the world, including in the United States and in Europe. By painting a distorted picture of South Africa's racial landscape, Afriforum aligns itself with international far-right movements, amplifying a narrative that suits their agenda. This brings us to the broader context of Afriforum's international connections. As we see a global rise in far-right movements, we can't ignore how Afriforum fits into this picture. With figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk finding themselves more vocal in their support for organizations and movements that align with right-wing ideologies, we need to ask, does Afriforum benefit from these connections? Trump and Musk have both made public statements supporting the rights of white South Africans, and these comments have helped validate Afriforum's narrative. In Trump's case, his rhetoric often revolves around the protection of Western civilization, a coded phrase that resonates with white nationalist movements. Musk, a South African-born billionaire, has also expressed concerns over the perceived mistreatment of white South Africans, which dovetails with Afriforum's messaging. But do these figures support Afriforum and its allies because they are truly concerned about the plight of Afrikaners? Or is there something deeper at play? The truth is more complicated. These leaders, whether consciously or not, are aligning themselves with the groups that promote a global white nationalist agenda. Trump's rhetoric particularly has drawn him closer to the far-right movements that have flourished in countries like South Africa, where the struggles of white South Africans are often presented as part of a broader battle against multiculturalism and racial equality. In essence, Afriforum's alignment with such figures is not just about South Africa. It's about feeding into a larger dangerous ideology, the idea that Western white identity is under global threat and that this threat needs to be resisted by any means necessary. Afriforum's role in South African society, therefore, is not simply one of advocacy for Afrikaner rights. It is an organization that thrives on racial division, fear, and victimhood. Their international campaigns further feed into the hands of global far-right movements, amplifying the voices of white supremacists who seek to portray themselves as victims in a world that is rapidly becoming more diverse. Afriforum's actions serve to polarize South African society, not unite it. And when organizations like this gain traction, especially with the support of influential figures like Trump and Musk, it's a reminder that the struggle for racial justice and equality is still ongoing, not just in South Africa but around the world. Just as a reminder to Afriforum and like-minded bigots, whites have been the biggest beneficiaries of the ANC's incompetence and lack of resolve. Whites still largely enjoy life as if 1994 never happened. In many cases, they are much better off even. Black people, on the other hand, are still at the margins as if 1994 never happened. Where would you be if Kill the Boer was meant as a real war cry? If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and comment. And please hit the subscribe button. See you in the next one.